Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Wednesday, August 19th. Tonight we drift slowly across 22 countries, from Equatorial Guinea to Vatican City. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in and let the world turn. Equatorial Guinea sits on the western coast of Central Africa, a small nation whose modern story has been shaped by the oil and gas lying deep beneath the waters of the Gulf of Guinea. These days, there's word from the offshore energy sector that the wider region is entering a fresh chapter of deepwater development. Final investment decisions on several projects across sub-Saharan Africa are expected to drive production growth in the years ahead. For Equatorial Guinea, where oil has been the backbone of the economy for over 2 decades, that regional trend carries real significance. Deepwater projects are expensive and slow to build. They take years of planning before a single drop reaches the surface, but once they come online, they can sustain a country's output long after older, shallower fields have begun to fade. The broader momentum suggests that the waters off West and Central Africa remain among the most promising in the world for deepwater exploration. For a country of roughly 1.5 million people, positioned between Cameroon and Gabon on the Bight of Biafra, that quiet promise, patient, long-term, carried out far from shore, is something worth holding on to as the night settles in. North Korea finds itself spoken of these days as a partner in something larger than the Korean peninsula. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has described the two countries as fighting together for what he called a new, righteous world order. It is a phrase that carries a certain weight, arriving at a time when Pyongyang and Moscow have drawn closer than they have been in decades. North Korea has its own framing of the moment. Through its state news agency, it has denounced the joint military drills between the United States and South Korea, long a fixture of life here and now themselves in question. President Trump has signaled he wants to cut those drills and has pushed for a meeting with Kim Jong-un this year. Kim, Trump says, has responded to the request for a conversation, so the region is shifting in several directions at once. North Korea is being courted by Washington at the same time it stands alongside Moscow. South Korea's President Lee has told his country to prepare for a worst-case scenario and called for greater military independence. The old assumptions on the peninsula are loosening, and what replaces them is not yet clear. For now, North Korea sits at a table where several powers are pulling up chairs, and the conversations are happening in more than one language. Solomon Islands sits at the edge of the Pacific, where the sea has never been an abstract thing. It's the road, the food, the boundary of every village. So when the country begins shaping its first national response to what's being called climate loss and damage, it's not a bureaucratic exercise. It's a reckoning with what's already been lost and what can still be held. The phrase loss and damage carries weight in global climate talks. It means the harm that comes after adaptation fails, when rising seas or shifting weather take something you can't get back. For Solomon Islands, that's not a future scenario. Communities have watched shorelines move, gardens fail, fresh water turn brackish. A national framework, the first of its kind for this country, is an attempt to name those losses honestly and to plan for them instead of only reacting. Details are still emerging, and the full shape of the policy isn't yet public. But the act of building it matters. It means a government is sitting down with the reality of what climate change has already cost its people and asking what responsibility, what repair, what preparation looks like from here. If you're still with me, you might picture those low islands under a wide sky tonight, the water close on every side. The sea is always there. Now, slowly, so is the will to answer it. Laos has always been a country shaped by water. The Mekong runs through its length, and smaller rivers fold down from the mountains in every direction. These days, that water is doing something new. Laos is accelerating a shift toward electric vehicles, and the power behind them comes from the country's own hydropowered dams. It's a quiet kind of transition. You won't hear the engine the way you used to, and in a place where the landscape has always spoken louder than the traffic. That feels fitting. The details are still emerging, but the direction is clear. A country that has long exported electricity to its neighbors is beginning to keep more of it for its own roads. There's something steady about the idea. The rivers don't stop. The dams hold back the flow, and the flow becomes current, and the current becomes motion. In Vientiane, where a new bakery cafe has opened its doors and the China-Laos Railway keeps moving cargo north and south, the streets are slowly changing character. Not all at once. Not with fanfare, just a little less noise, a little less smoke, a little more of the river's work showing up where the rubber meets the road. If you're still with me, picture that for a moment. A motorbike gliding past a morning market, almost silent, carrying the sound of falling water somewhere inside it. Laos has always moved at its own pace. Now that pace just happens to be powered by something the country has always had in abundance: a river, a dam, a road, the night settling over all three. DR Congo is living through the deadliest Ebola outbreak in its own history, and for a country that has faced this virus before, that carries a particular weight. Infections have passed 5,000. The World Health Organization has called it a global emergency, and its chief has said plainly that the outbreak is far from under control, that it remains a public health emergency of international concern. What makes this especially hard is that most deaths are still happening inside communities, in homes and neighborhoods, rather than in treatment centers where care can reach people in time. Authorities have warned that the outbreak has not yet peaked, and that the spread is outpacing the response on the ground. And yet, alongside all of this, ordinary life presses forward. Catholic schools have been preparing for the new academic year, figuring out how to keep children safe while keeping classrooms open. Parents are sending their children forward. Teachers are gathering their lessons. The outbreak shapes everything, but it does not replace everything. If you're still with me tonight, hold a thought for the families in those communities, and for the people doing the slow, patient work of care in a place where that work has never been easy. Spain has given its Almaraz nuclear power plant a few more years of life. The operating license, which had been drawing toward its end, has been extended into 2030, a decision that keeps the reactors running a little longer while the country figures out what comes next. Almaraz sits in the west of Spain, in the region of Extremadura. Wide, quiet country, hot in summer, crossed by rivers and old Roman roads. It's not a place that makes a lot of noise. But for decades, the plant there has supplied electricity to a great many Spanish homes. A steady hum of power in a landscape that otherwise feels far from everything. Nuclear energy in Spain has always carried a particular weight. There are those who see it as essential, a way to keep the lights on without burning more fuel. And there are those who would rather see it go, who worry about what's left behind, and what might happen if something ever went wrong. Both views have been part of the conversation for a long time, and both will surely stay part of it. What this extension does, really, is buy time. Not a verdict, not a final answer, just a few more years for the country to decide how it wants to power itself and what it's willing to carry forward. Out in Extremadura, the cooling towers will keep rising against the horizon as they have for years. The question of how long they'll remain is still open. But for now, the answer stretches a little further down the road. Finland has spent generations pulling water out of its land. For a long time, the thinking was straightforward enough. You drained the bogs and marshes, you opened up ground for farming and forestry, and you moved on in a country this far north. The growing season is short, and every patch of usable soil felt worth the trouble. But the land remembers being wet, and in recent years, something has been quietly returning to the low places. Something that doesn't read the planning documents. Beavers have been coming back. Where beavers settle, water follows. They dam the small streams and old drainage ditches, and the pools gather behind the sticks and mud. Land that was dried out starts to fill again, not all at once, slowly, pool by pool, season by season. Finland has been working to restore wetlands on its own terms, with public programs and conservation groups and heavy machinery. But the beavers don't wait for permits. They just build, and the water that returns carries more than itself. It holds carbon in the soil, it slows floodwater, it shelters birds and frogs and insects. There's a kind of patience in it. A drained wetland can feel like a finished story. But some stories aren't finished just because people stopped watching. Sometimes the next chapter writes itself, one dam at a time. Burundi has known years of difficulty, that much is plain. A crisis response plan is still in place, stretching through to 2026, which tells you the work of recovery is not something anyone expects to finish quickly. But something quieter is happening there now, and it may matter more than the louder headlines. UNESCO has been establishing what they call an operational framework for dialogue and trauma healing activities in the country. It is not a dramatic announcement. There are no treaties signed on a stage. What it means in practice is that people are being given space and structure to talk about what happened to them and to begin healing from it. There are young people in Burundi too, whom UNICEF describes as survivors, working to rebuild their lives. You can imagine what that takes, not just courage, but patience, and the kind of steady support that does not make the news because it happens in rooms and community centers rather than on screens. What strikes you about this is the patience of it. A framework for dialogue does not fix anything overnight. It does not erase what came before, but it says that someone decided the answer to Burundi's wounds was not to rush past them, but to sit with them carefully and begin the long work of mending. That may not sound like much, but in a country that has known too much hurry and too much hurt, slowness can be its own kind of mercy. Albania has been reaching toward the future, and in a way that's caught some attention. The country introduced a cheerful artificial intelligence figure, what reporters have taken to calling an AI minister, a bright, optimistic creation, the kind of thing that makes you smile when you first hear about it. A small Balkan nation on the Adriatic, leaning into tomorrow with a digital face and a hopeful voice. But the story beneath is less simple. The AI minister, it turns out, was the product of a government agency that is now under investigation for what the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project describes as massive corruption. The details are still emerging, and the full picture isn't yet clear, but the contrast is hard to miss. A sunny new face coming out of an institution with serious questions hanging over it. And that's where Albania finds itself these days, caught between the promise of new technology and the older, harder business of public trust. Investigations have a way of unfolding slowly, and what this one will uncover, no one can yet say. But the image lingers, a cheerful AI, the work of hands that are now being looked at very carefully indeed. Somewhere in Tirana, the future is still being built. It's just that the foundations this week are drawing a little more scrutiny than anyone expected. Gabon, a country perhaps best known beyond its borders for its rainforests and Atlantic coastline, is quietly looking upward. The government has begun developing a national strategy for satellite and space technologies, a modest phrase, but one that carries a certain weight. It's easy to think of space policy as belonging only to the largest and wealthiest nations, but Gabon sits almost directly on the equator, a geographic detail that has long mattered in the world of satellite launches, and its officials are now thinking about what that advantage might mean for the country's own future. The details of the strategy are still taking shape. What we know is that this is about connection, better mapping of Gabon's vast forests, better monitoring of land and water, better communications for communities that have waited a long time to be reached. There's something gentle about this kind of ambition. Not a race to the heavens, but a country taking stock of what tools it needs and asking, sensibly, how to build them. If you're still with me, picture Libreville in the evening quiet, the capital whose name means free town, and somewhere in a modest office, someone is sketching the outlines of a future that includes the sky. It won't be the loudest story from this part of the world, but it tells you something about how a nation sees itself and where it believes it might go. Hungary tonight, and a road that was supposed to carry people home. 12 people have died in a bus crash here, Polish pilgrims traveling back from Medjugorje, the Marian shrine in Bosnia and Herzegovina that has drawn the faithful for decades. At least 10 others were injured. The bus was carrying people who had gone a long way to pray and who were on the last stretch toward home when something went wrong. The bishops in Poland have spoken about the loss, mourning pilgrims who traveled in prayer and who didn't make it back. We don't have many details about how the crash happened or what sent the bus off its course. Just the bare heavy fact of it. 12 gone, others hurt, families in Poland waiting for word that will change everything. A pilgrimage is a particular kind of journey. You go towards something, a shrine, a quiet, a grace you can't find at home. Then you turn around and you carry whatever you found back with you. That last leg, the road home, is supposed to be the easy part. The rest, the thinking, the settling back into ordinary life, somewhere on a Hungarian road, that journey broke. 12 people who were going home, and the people who love them who are still waiting. Cambodia has been carrying a hard reputation these past few years, one no country would choose. Large-scale scam operations, some sprawling across borders, drew the attention of governments and journalists across the region. Now something is shifting in how the country responds. Observers frame it bluntly, a move from what they call a scam empire towards something more like a security state. That phrase suggests the crackdown on criminal networks is widening into something that reshapes daily governance, how authority touches ordinary life. What that looks like on the ground, for the people living under it, takes time to understand, but tightening rarely stops neatly at the edge of the original problem. Cambodia knows something about rebuilding. Its temples still rise from jungle. Its villages still float on the Tonle Sap. Decades of recovery from deeper wounds show everywhere, in what's been restored and in what still aches. So this shift sits inside an older story, a country finding its footing, weighing how much security it wants and what it costs. The part that lingers, if you're still with me, is the part always quietest in stories like this. Not what a state does to those it names as criminals, but what slowly changes for everyone else, passing through the same checkpoints, living under the same widening gaze. Tuvalu keeps a careful watch over its waters, and these days that watch is earning its keep. An operation called Island Chief, a regional fisheries enforcement effort, has identified 16 vessels fishing illegally across the Pacific. For Tuvalu, the math is simple and stark. The country's land is small, a handful of low-lying atolls barely above the tide line, but its exclusive economic zone reaches far out into open ocean, and keeping eyes on all of it is the kind of work that asks patience and persistence from a place that has both. The vessels turned up by Island Chief were fishing where they shouldn't have been, in waters that belong by international agreement to Pacific nations. Foreign fishing boats have long been a fact of life here, some welcome, some not. The difference comes down to whether the people who've lived beside these reefs for generations get to decide what's taken and what's left. Tuvalu and its neighbors have built that decision into law. Operations like Island Chief are how they make the law real on the water. 16 vessels flagged, named, and noted. Not a dramatic number, perhaps. But the sea remembers what's measured, and the measuring is the work. Montenegro has been turning its attention to the foundations of its public life. A parliamentary committee approved constitutional amendments aimed at requiring integrity checks, a provision that, on paper at least, asks something simple of the people entrusted with public office: that they be examined. Their backgrounds and interests held up to light before power is placed in their hands. The word integrity carries particular weight in a small country where personal connections thread through every layer of public life. What sounds like a dry procedural step is really a question about trust, who deserves it, and how it should be earned. Constitutional reform is slow work by design. It's meant to be hard to change, and harder still to undo. So when a country writes a new requirement into its foundational document, not as a passing law, but as something meant to last, it says something about what that country wants from itself. We don't yet know how this will look in practice, how the checks will be carried out, or whether they'll satisfy the people who pushed for them. What we know is that Montenegro has decided the principle matters enough to place it in the constitution itself. And for a country still finding its footing between old habits and new expectations, that's no small thing. Paraguay is home to one of the more unexpected communities you'll find anywhere in South America, a Japanese diaspora that has been growing there for nearly a century. This week, Japan's crown prince and princess are traveling to the country to honor those ties, to strengthen a connection that stretches across oceans and generations. It began in the 1930s and again after the Second World War, when families from Japan made the long journey to Paraguay, settling mostly in rural colonies, building farms, building schools, building lives. Today, tens of thousands of Japanese Paraguayans call the country home. They've become part of the fabric in agriculture, in business, in the quiet rhythm of daily life. The visit from the crown prince and princess is a diplomatic gesture, but it's also something more personal than that. It's a recognition that distance doesn't dissolve belonging, that a community planted far from its origins still puts down roots. And Paraguay has always made room for that kind of story. It's a country shaped by waves of migration: Guarani and Spanish, German and Italian, Korean and Japanese, each one adding a thread to something that keeps growing. So if you're still with me, picture a quiet road in one of those old colonies, the red earth, the low buildings, maybe a lantern lit in the evening air. A delegation from across the world has come to say, "We remember you." And in Paraguay, that's a welcome that's been earned over time. Sweden is looking ahead to September, and the shape of the contest is becoming clearer. Polls are showing the opposition bloc with a substantial lead over the governing coalition, a margin wide enough that people are beginning to talk about a change in direction. The governing parties have time still, but the gap is real, and it has held. Sweden's elections tend to be steady affairs: high turnout, coalition math, long debates about immigration and welfare and crime. What these polls suggest is that the public mood has shifted, or at least settled, earlier than usual. The opposition has been pressing on law and order, on energy costs, on the everyday pressures that Swedish households are feeling. The government has been defending its record, pointing to welfare investments and economic management, but the numbers haven't moved much in their favor. None of this is decided yet. September is still weeks away, and Swedish campaigns can tighten late. But right now, the opposition has the wind, and the government is working to find it again. What stays with you is how quietly the shift has happened. No single dramatic moment, just a steady drift in the polls, week after week, until the lead became too large to call a fluke. If you're still with me, that's where Sweden stands tonight, watching the numbers, waiting for the campaign to truly begin. St. Vincent and the Grenadines sits in the southern Caribbean, a chain of islands stretching toward Grenada. It's a small nation, but it has a way of keeping its own council on the world stage. This week, its prime minister concluded a state visit to Taiwan, the kind of trip that rarely makes headlines beyond the places involved. That's because it's a working relationship, not a showy one. Taiwan maintains formal diplomatic ties with only a small number of countries, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines is among them, one of several Caribbean nations that have held to that choice over the years. State visits between them tend to be quiet, practical affairs, cooperation, development, the steady work of two places that simply show up for each other. There's something worth sitting with in that. In a world where the loudest powers often set the terms, a small island nation decides its own friendships, keeps them through changing seasons, and means it. No fanfare required. The visit probably dealt with the things that matter to daily life, the kind of cooperation that doesn't need a spotlight to be real. If you're still with me, that's where St. Vincent and the Grenadines rests tonight, quietly, on its own terms, in good company. In Serbia, a quiet shift is taking place in the landscape of news and information. United Group, a company that has built one of the largest media networks across the Balkans, is handing its Serbian media outlets to Alpak Capital, an investment firm that has been expanding its interests in the region. For ordinary people across Serbia, this might not feel like an immediate change. The TV channels and news sites they check each morning will likely keep familiar names and faces. But ownership changes in media are never quite as simple as new letterhead and a different logo on the building wall. They carry questions about direction, about which stories get told, and about how independent voices remain when new hands hold the reins. United Group has been a significant presence in Balkan media for years, operating cable systems and television channels that reach millions of homes. Alpak Capital, for its part, has shown growing interest in the region's communications infrastructure. The transfer suggests confidence in the commercial future of Serbian media, even as the broader questions about press independence that accompany any ownership transition will settle in their own time. What matters in the end is whether someone sitting in Novi Sad or Niš still finds the news they need when they open a paper or turn on a screen. The names on the ownership papers may change. The habit of listening, of wanting to know, of trusting enough to keep reading, that is the part that has to hold. Bhutan is doing something quiet but significant this week. The kingdom has put out a call for proposals to develop what it calls a loss and damage architecture, a framework for dealing with the harms caused by a changing climate. In plain terms, it's about building a system to account for what's being lost and to respond when the damage can't be undone. For a country perched high in the eastern Himalayas, this isn't abstract. Bhutan's glaciers have been retreating for years. Farmers watch the seasons shift. Floods come where they didn't before. These aren't projections. They're part of life now. What's striking is the steadiness of it. A government choosing to plan rather than react, to put the structures in place before the next crisis, not after, to name what is being lost and to prepare carefully for what may still be coming. There's something dignified about that kind of foresight, not dramatic, just necessary. And there's something fitting about it too. Bhutan was recently named the quietest country in the world, a place that measures well-being differently, that has never chased noise. Now it's doing some of the least glamorous work there is, the paperwork of resilience, no fanfare, just the steady business of getting ready. That kind of work rarely makes headlines, but it's the kind that matters in the long run. Senegal has turned to one of its own this week, naming Patrick Vieira as the new head coach of its national football team. Vieira was born in Senegal, though his playing days unfolded far from home, mostly in France and England, where he became one of the steadiest midfield minds of his generation. Now he comes back to the country where his story began. He takes over from Pape Thia, who departed the role recently. The change arrives at a delicate moment with African Cup of Nations qualifiers on the horizon, the sort of matches that decide whether a nation earns its place on the continent's biggest stage. Vieira has been coaching for years now, most recently in the United States with New York City FC. He's managed in France too, and in England. The thread through all of it has been a kind of quiet, not flash, not spectacle, but a steady attention to how the pieces fit together. For Senegal, this feels like more than a coaching change. It's a son coming home with new tools and old roots. The qualifiers will tell part of the story soon enough. But the longer tale is about what it means when a country hands its team to someone who carries it personally, who learned the game across the world but never lost the thread back to where he started. Uzbekistan has been hosting the 38th International Olympiad in Informatics, a competition that brings together some of the sharpest young programmers from around the world. It's the kind of event that doesn't make a lot of noise, but it says something quiet and important about a place, that it wants to be where young minds are taken seriously. The Olympiad in Informatics is one of the most respected competitions of its kind, now in its 38th year. Teams travel from dozens of countries. Teenagers who have spent years training, solving problems most adults would find daunting. For Uzbekistan, hosting fits into a larger story. The country has been building itself into something of an IT hub for Central Asia, investing in the things that digital economies need to grow, and in the talent that might one day drive them. There's a kind of logic to it. A young population, a government that sees technology as a way forward, and a region hungry for alternatives to the old economic models. You don't transform a country with one event, but when young people from across the world sit down together to solve hard problems, something shifts, quietly, at the level of what feels possible. A country opening its doors to the world's young problem solvers and telling them this part of Central Asia is ready to build. In Vatican City, behind the walls and beneath the dome of St. Peter's, there is a garden, and these days it grows entirely without synthetic chemicals. The Vatican gardens cover more than half of the tiny city-state's territory, and they have become fully organic. No pesticides, no artificial fertilizers. Just soil, water, sunlight, and the patience that gardening always seems to ask of you. It's a small country, the smallest independent state in the world, and the gardens are its quiet half. Its green lungs, if you like. They've been tended for centuries, by hands that changed with the centuries too. To go fully organic is a choice about how you treat that land, and maybe about how you think about the earth itself. Things grow at their own pace. Pests are managed the old way, with attention and care rather than chemistry. There's something fitting about it. A place so often associated with ceremony and stone, choosing to let its quietest corner follow nature's own rhythm. The garden doesn't make the headlines that a papal declaration makes, but it's there, growing, season after season. And if you're still with me, maybe that's the right kind of story for tonight. Something quiet, something rooted, something that simply carries on. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.